Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Carla. If you're new here, I make life abroad videos, crochet/making content, and video essays. So if you're interested in any of that, subscribe. We just reached over 200 subs, so I'm very happy and thank you for clicking on this video. So as you already know, based on the title, today we're talking about 5 things that I wish I knew before I moved abroad to the UK, and specifically to London. So if you're interested in living abroad or moving to or visiting London, then you're going to want to watch this video. And yeah, let's get started. So to provide a tiny bit of context, I've been living in London permanently since fall 2021, so that's a bit over 2 years now. And before that, I was spending a good amount of time here as a tourist after living in Paris during the year between like 2020 and 2021 starting. So I kind of feel like I've been living in London for 3 years. When I moved here permanently, I came here for my master's in journalism, which I did directly after graduating from university in the States. So I was here on a student visa, and now I'm on the graduate visa, which you've probably heard people talk about before if you're interested in studying in the UK as an American. And now I have the right to live and work in the UK for 2 years, and then after that I would have to find some sort of other sponsorship. I've only lived in London, and I've pretty much stayed in the same area, like northeast. So for anything that I say about London, especially if you're a Londoner yourself, just keep that in mind, because London is a huge city, bigger than New York geographically, and things can really vary from area to area, just like any place in the world. But now let's actually get into the video. So the very first thing that I want to talk about is the hard water. So I've always been the type of person where, like, you know, when Brita filters, for example, first became a thing when I was probably in middle school, I thought they were a bit silly. Like, I didn't understand why some of my friends would only drink from the Brita at their house, because I was used to always drinking tap water, and, you know, nothing bad ever happened to me. It's just water, you know? I've also always had pretty average skin in terms of, like, you know, not being super dry, not being super oily, especially on my body, just very, very normal, taking care of my skin, but not having to do anything in particular. But when I moved to London, and I've lived in Chicago, I've lived in Paris, and now London, and in London, that was the first place ever where I started to have really, really, really bad problems with my skin and my hair. So for example, I started getting dandruff, or if I didn't have dandruff, my hair was just really, really greasy, which is something I had never experienced. And, you know, like, my scalp itchy, even though I just shampooed like 2 times, and all of this stuff. And then as far as my skin went, constantly itchy, and like needing to scratch myself, and just being super, super dry. So especially for the hair, I started like looking into different products and changing my products and stuff. You know, it got better, but then it would get worse, and it wasn't working out. And finally I realized it's just the water. And I already knew that the water in London was quite hard, because lime scale is quite common. Like, you have to descale your kettle, or you can put like lime scale remover in the bath or on your faucets and stuff like that. So I knew that the water was hard, but I didn't realize that it was starting to have an impact on my skin, and that that's really, really common. And of course, if you've grown up in London, maybe your skin and hair get used to this, but I've seen a big like uptick in marketing for shower filters from British companies that are marketed to Londoners. So I think people must be starting to notice, like, if I actually just change the water, I won't have to buy special creams. And honestly, that changed my life, because I was always so itchy, and it was horrible. And especially, like, you know, putting lotion on after a shower and still being itchy, but your lotion hasn't dried yet, so then you're getting like lotion under your nails, and it was just like, I was just constantly like red and like uncomfortable. So I get a shower filter. It looks like this, and I change it every 6 months. It's not that expensive. They also have these kinds of shower filters, where I think Hello Clean is one of the brands. But yeah, if you're going to move to London and you're not already used to hard water, then keep this in mind, because I was the type of person that was like, I have pretty like average hair and skin. Like I've never experienced these issues or had to deal with them. And then I moved here and I was like, oh my God. Okay. Now, the second thing that I wish I knew before I moved to London is how difficult it can be to find a place to rent and how many hoops you have to jump through, especially as an immigrant, to actually secure a place. So I've only gone through the flat hunt in London as a student. I've been living in the flat I'm at since I was like less than halfway through my master's, and since I've started work I haven't had to find a new flat, thankfully. So my experience is probably worse than what it would be now because I didn't have any renting history in the UK and I was a student, so I didn't have an income. That being said, I spent months and hours and so much time of my life messaging people on Spare Room, which is like a house share search website, on popular Facebook groups for renting, and the flat that I ended up in came from zero of those efforts. I ended up finding this flat with two other girls who were both already working and were both British. Without them, I don't think I would be in this flat right now. I'd be somewhere else. And because I was a student and an immigrant with no previous renting history in the UK, I needed to pay 6 months of rent up front, and they also wanted me to get a guarantor. And because I didn't feel comfortable asking someone to be my guarantor, I was considering using like a guarantor company. It's like a third party that will be your guarantor. But that cost, I think the one I was looking at cost like £90 a month. I wasn't going to do that. So I just talked my way out of it. I'm lucky. I only had to pay the 6 months up front, but many people can't do that. So if you're going to come to London, make sure you have savings or a plan if you don't have somewhere to stay right off the bat, which you probably won't, because you need to be prepared for the flat hunt to take a long time and to be quite expensive, at least upfront. I don't think this is necessarily rare for big cities like New York, Chicago, Paris, but it was my first like real experience renting, and the 6 months up front was definitely a big cost. The third thing I want to talk about is the amount of green space in London. This is more of a positive thing that I wish I knew before I came here, because I really love it, and I think it's a big advantage that London has over other major cities, even European cities. So you have Hyde Park, you have St. James's Park, you have Victoria Park, you have Haggerston Park, you have Kew Gardens, you have Brockwell Park, you have many different commons and squares, and there's surprisingly a lot of green space for such a major and gigantic city. And I would say for the most part, these parks are pretty well preserved, and unlike a lot of green spaces in Paris, you can bring dogs, not that I have a dog, but you can bring dogs into these spaces and you'll end up seeing like animals, like I think you can see like pelicans and squirrels, of course, parakeets. So there's a lot of green space in London. So if you're into that and you are willing to seek it out, obviously it's not like everywhere you turn there's a giant park, but if you're willing to seek it out, you can have pretty good access to green space, especially if you're already someone who comes from like from an urban area and you're used to not having a lot of green space. I think you'd really like that if you come to London. I know people who are quite outdoorsy, who come from, I don't know, Scotland or California, and they're not impressed by the green space in London. But for me personally, it's enough, and I find it really impressive. Especially St. James's Park. I think that one's my favorite. It is so beautiful. And Victoria Park is also absolutely massive, and like you could run like 10K there easily. So yeah, let's appreciate the parks in London and any green space. You just have to make the most of it if you have a little patch of trees and a bit of quiet around you. The fourth thing I want to talk about is the winter here. So like I said, I'm from Chicago, where the winter is brutal. I like to tell everyone that it gets colder than Antarctica sometimes. You know, the river freezes, the lake freezes, and at least for me in school and in uni, I would have the day off, not because there was too much snow, but because it was too cold. So I know a thing or two about winter, and I actually don't mind the winter. But here, it's a bit different. And I think the reason why winter can be a lot more difficult here is because the homes are older and not as well insulated. So inside your house can get a lot colder than you might be used to if you're coming from a place where your home was really well insulated and you have central heat. In my apartment in Chicago when I was in college, we definitely had radiators. And from what I understand, in the US, central heat is when it comes from the vent and it goes throughout the whole house. And here in the UK, I think they still call the heat coming from radiators central heat because it comes from like a centralized system. But to me, that's not what it is. Like if you have to stand near the radiator to feel warm, then it's not central heat in my American brain. Sorry if that's offensive. But you can just put on a fluffy robe and some socks. And if anything, it's a lot cozier. Like I love to a certain extent when it's a bit cold in my flat and I can just like cozy up in lots of layers and with like a hot chocolate or some tea and like really lean into it being winter. But of course, sometimes it's just not practical, especially because in the flats in London, it's very common, especially in the winter, to get what they call damp, which is what Americans would call mold. And I don't completely understand because Brits will say damp and mold and they'll kind of refer to them sometimes interchangeably, but sometimes also as like separate things. And you know, there's mold spray that works really well. You can get a dehumidifier, either like an electric one, which I have, and then also these like little packs that are actually meant more for like camping. I wasn't well prepared last year and got some mold near my bed because my bedroom is at an exterior wall, and we also had quite the issue with mold in the shower, so we are just extra careful of opening the windows in the bathroom in the winter right after we shower, because you're going to be really cold if you have the window open while showering, but in the summer the window's open all the time. But you got to be prepared for that. Obviously these are like very much first world problems. Mold can get really dangerous, so it's good to stay on top of it, and it's not the end of the world if it's not affecting your health. You don't want to get to that point where it is affecting your health. And there are like different renters' rights organizations, unions that will try their best to help people who are in a really bad situation with damp/mold in their flats. But I hope for you, if you move to London, that you have a flat that either doesn't get any mold or where it is manageable with simple things like a dehumidifier and cracking the window every so often. And the fifth thing I want to talk about are the notice periods if you want to leave a job. I haven't ever left a job in the UK, I'm all good. But when I've been in like contracted positions where I had a fixed term, so I didn't have to worry about, you know, eventually leaving if I got a better opportunity, I just like went through with my contract. I would still have colleagues who were on permanent contracts, and if they want to leave, you know, they would break the news to everyone, probably to their boss first, and then to their colleagues, and then they'd be like, oh, I'm leaving, and you'd get really sad and be like, oh, I don't want you to leave, like, you're my favorite colleague, and then you'd be like, so when's your last day? Like, oh, in 3 months, because the notice period here for a lot of jobs, honestly, it's typically 2 or 3 months. I don't know if there's a legal requirement. I'll have to look into it. But I found this mind-blowing at first. But it helps explain why the job hunt can take a really long time for some people, because, you know, a company might find out that so-and-so is leaving. They have 3 months until they leave. So they might, if they're keen, start the hiring process right then and there, because they know that the person who might take this role, if they already have a job, they're also going to need to give 3 months notice to their company before they take this new role. Does that make sense? So things can move a lot slower, and you want to keep in mind that, like, if you see yourself jumping around a lot, you need to plan ahead. You can't just say, you know what, I need to change a pace, I'm going to leave this job tomorrow or in 2 weeks. You have to let them know, typically 2 months before. But also, I like to tell people this because if you are looking for a job in London and it's taking so long and you're starting to get discouraged, it's probably not because of you, and it's just because things move a bit slower here in comparison to the US, where typically people give like 2 weeks notice, and I'm not sure that there's any standardized rules for notice periods, which can be both bad and a good thing. Okay, so those were the 5 things that I wish I knew before moving abroad to London, as an American specifically. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions about life abroad and how to move abroad, either to London or just in general, especially as an American, because that's my only experience, then comment down below and let me know. And if you want more content like this, life abroad content, video essays, and crochet/making stuff, subscribe. And thank you for being here, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!